Hanna sat in the corner of the massive meeting room, her small translator device resting on the table beside her notepad. The room was built for giants, with ceilings that stretched up so high that human voices seemed to disappear into the darkness above. Everything here was made for the Krathen, the towering reptilian beings who now filled most of the space with their bulk and their loud, hissing voices. She wore the standard blue uniform of the Diplomatic Translation Corps, with a small silver badge that marked her as Level 7 interpreter. To everyone in the room, that was all she was. Just another human whose job was to turn the alien words into something the human delegates could understand. The Krathen barely looked at her when they entered the room each morning. To them, she might as well have been a piece of furniture. Admiral Vextar dominated the center of the room like a mountain of dark green scales and muscle. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, with yellow eyes that seemed to glow in the artificial light of the space station. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together, and when he spoke in the human language, each word sounded forced and unnatural. But when he spoke in his own tongue, the words flowed like water, full of meaning that the other humans in the room could not catch. Captain Park Jiho sat across from the alien admiral, looking small and tired in his gray military uniform. His hair was starting to show silver at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that spoke of too many long nights and difficult decisions. He had the look of a soldier who had been thrown into a job he was not ready for. The other human delegates flanked him on both sides, all of them seeming nervous and out of place among these massive alien beings. The negotiations had been going on for 3 months now, ever since first contact had been made with the Krathen Empire. Earth's government had been so excited to meet another intelligent species that they had rushed to set up these talks on the neutral space station Concordia. The humans wanted trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and peaceful coexistence. They believed that meeting the Krathen was the dawn of a new age for humanity. Vexatar had different ideas. Hanna listened as the admiral spoke to his subordinates in the clicking, hissing language of his people. The other humans in the room waited patiently for her to translate, but she already knew what he was saying. She had been listening to these conversations for months, building up a perfect understanding of not just the words, but the meaning behind them. "These soft skins are even weaker than our first report suggested," Vextar was saying to his military advisor, a smaller Krathen named Threk, who always stood at his right side. "Look at their pathetic leader. He jumps at shadows and agrees to everything we suggest. They will be easy to break when the time comes." Hanna made a few notes on her pad, and then looked up at Captain Park. "Admiral Vextar says that he appreciates the human commitment to finding peaceful solutions," she said in a calm, professional voice. "He believes that both our species can benefit from continued dialogue." Park nodded and made his own notes. He seemed relieved by the translation, not knowing that the alien admiral had actually been discussing the best way to invade Earth's colonies. Threk leaned closer to his commander and spoke in a lower tone. "The human military seems focused on defensive positions around their home system. Our scouts report that their fleet movements suggest they are preparing for a siege rather than any kind of offensive action. They truly believe we mean them no harm." "Perfect," Vextar replied, his lipless mouth curving into what might have been a smile. "Let them prepare their defenses around the wrong targets. When we strike, it will be at their supply lines and colony worlds. By the time they realize what is happening, half their territory will be ours." Hanna translated this as a discussion about trade routes and shipping schedules. She had become very good at creative translation over the past few months. The Velnari ambassador sat quietly at a smaller table near the wall. Quen was a peaceful creature, with soft gray fur and large, dark eyes that seemed to hold ancient sadness. His people had been conquered by the Krathen decades ago, and now served as a client species within the Empire. He was here as an observer, officially to help with cultural understanding between the humans and Krathen. But Hanna had noticed the way he watched everything, and the careful way he chose his words when he spoke. During a break in the formal discussions, Quen approached the human delegation. He moved carefully, as if each step might be his last. "Captain Park," he said in heavily accented but clear human speech, I wonder if you might benefit from understanding more about Krathen culture before making any final agreements. Park looked interested. What do you mean, Ambassador? The Krathen value strength above all things, Quen said, glancing nervously toward where Vextar was speaking with his officers. They respect only those who can stand against them as equals. A species that appears weak or vulnerable may find itself in a difficult position. Are you saying we should be more aggressive in the negotiations? Asked Kim Nari, the young communications officer who always sat at Park's left side. She looked worried by the suggestion. Quen's large eyes flickered toward Hana for just a moment before returning to Park. I am saying that appearances can be deceiving, and that wisdom sometimes requires patience. Hana caught the look and understood. Quen knew more than he was saying, but he could not speak freely with Krathen ears nearby. She filed this information away with everything else she had learned. When the formal session resumed, Vextar began, outlining what he called a preliminary framework for cooperation. He spoke in the human language, but his words were carefully chosen to hide their true meaning. He talked about shared security arrangements and resource optimization and population management protocols. To the human delegates, it sounded like the beginning of a beneficial partnership. But when he turned to explain the details to his own people, the truth came out. Phase 1 will establish our bases in their outer colonies under the guise of joint defense stations, he told Threk. Phase 2 will begin the systematic relocation of human populations to areas where they can be more easily controlled. Phase 3 will be the formal annexation of their worlds into the Empire. How long until we can begin Phase 1? Threk asked. Soon, Vextar replied. Once they sign the initial agreements, we can begin moving our fleets into position. The humans are so eager for friendship that they will welcome our ships with open arms. Hana translated this as a discussion of mutual defense benefits and shared patrol duties. Captain Park seemed pleased by the idea of having powerful alien allies to help protect human space. The session continued for several more hours, with the Krathen laying out more details of their plans, while the humans remained completely unaware of what was really being discussed. Vextar spoke of breeding programs and labor assignments and the systematic dismantling of human military capabilities. Each horrible detail was translated by Hana into something that sounded reasonable and beneficial. As the day's meetings came to an end, Vextar made an announcement that sent chills down Hana's spine, even though she kept her expression perfectly neutral. The Grand Fleet will begin joint training exercises with human forces next week, he declared. This will be an excellent opportunity to evaluate human military capabilities and establish proper coordination protocols. What he told his subordinates was different. Once their ships are scattered across the training areas, they will be easy targets. We can eliminate their entire fleet before they know we have turned hostile. Park was delighted by the news of joint exercises. This is exactly the kind of cooperation we hoped for, he told his team. It shows that the Krathen are serious about building a real partnership with humanity. Hana gathered her notes and prepared to leave the meeting room along with the rest of the human delegation. Tomorrow would bring another day of negotiations, another day of listening to the aliens plan humanity's destruction, while pretending to offer friendship. But she was patient, and she was learning everything she needed to know. As she walked through the corridors of the space station toward her quarters, Hana allowed herself a small smile. Admiral Vextar was right about one thing. Appearances could be very deceiving indeed. The second week of negotiations brought new horrors that Hana had to translate into peaceful discussions. Admiral Vextar had grown more confident as the days passed, and his conversations with his officers became increasingly detailed about their plans for humanity. He no longer bothered to lower his voice when discussing invasion strategies, secure in his belief that the humans around him were too primitive to understand his language. Captain Park looked more tired each day. The stress of the negotiations was clearly wearing on him, and he often rubbed his temples during the longer sessions. The other human delegates seemed equally exhausted by the complex diplomatic process. They were trying so hard to make a good impression on their new alien neighbors that they missed all the warning signs that were hiding in plain sight. Kim Nari had started taking additional notes during the sessions, writing down every detail she could catch. She was young and eager, barely out of the academy, and she genuinely believed that these talks would lead to a golden age of cooperation between species. When she heard Vextar speaking in his own language, she would look hopefully at Hana for translation, never suspecting that what she was hearing and what she was being told were completely different things. The human breeding stock will need to be carefully selected, Vextar was explaining to Threk, during what the humans thought was a discussion about cultural exchange programs. We need strong specimens for labor and intelligent ones for technical work. The rest can be disposed of once we have established proper control. Hana translated this as a conversation about student exchange programs and shared research projects. She had become an expert at finding innocent interpretations for the most sinister statements. Threk nodded his massive head. What about their military leaders? The captain seems competent enough, though weak. Park and his officers will be useful during the transition, Vextar replied. They can help maintain order among their own people while we consolidate control. After that, they become unnecessary. Admiral Vextar expresses great confidence in Captain Park's leadership abilities, Hana told the human delegation. He believes that Captain Park would be an excellent liaison for future cooperation projects. Park actually smiled at this, not knowing he was being discussed like a tool to be used and then thrown away. The joint military exercises had been scheduled for the following month, and the details were being worked out in side meetings between the military officers. Chief Engineer Choi Daeho had joined the delegation to help with technical discussions, bringing with him decades of experience in spacecraft systems and defensive technologies. He was a quiet man who listened more than he spoke, but his eyes were always alert and watchful. During a break in the formal sessions, Daeho approached Hana at the small cafe area that had been set up for the human delegates. You must be getting tired of all this translation work, he said quietly as he poured himself a cup of coffee. It is what I am trained for, Hana replied, maintaining her professional demeanor. Still, it must be difficult to listen to all those conversations and turn them into something we can understand, Daeho continued. I imagine you hear things that are not always meant for human ears. Hana looked at him carefully. There was something in his tone that suggested he was asking about more than just translation difficulties. I only translate what is relevant to the negotiations, she said. Daeho nodded slowly. Of course, but if you ever heard anything that seemed important for our security, I hope you would feel comfortable sharing it with the appropriate people. I would certainly follow proper protocols, Hana assured him. The engineer smiled and walked away, but not before giving her a look that suggested he understood more than he was saying. Hana filed this interaction away with all the other interesting details she was collecting. Ambassador Quen had been trying to send subtle warnings to the human delegation for days, but his efforts were limited by the constant presence of Krathen observers. During the formal sessions, he mostly sat quietly and took notes, but Hana had noticed that he often positioned himself where he could see both the human and Krathen delegations, and his reactions to certain statements were very telling. When Vextar discussed what he called administrative zones for human populations, Quen's fur would bristle slightly. When the Admiral mentioned efficiency improvements in human industrial facilities, Quen's ears would flatten against his head. These were the signs of someone who had lived through exactly what the Krathen were planning for humanity. The breakthrough came during the third week when Vextar received a communication from his fleet commanders. He read the message during a session break, and his reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. He called Threk over and began speaking in rapid, excited bursts of his native language. The advanced scouts report that human defenses are exactly as weak as we expected, he said. Their patrol patterns are predictable, their response times are slow, and their weapons technology is at least 50 years behind our own. The fleet commanders estimate that total conquest can be achieved within 6 months of the initial strike. What about resistance from their population centers? Threk asked. Minimal, Vextar replied with what could only be described as glee. Humans are soft creatures who value individual life above victory. They will surrender rather than see their cities burned. Once we control their major population centers, the rest will fall in line quickly. and the timeline for beginning operations. As soon as these ridiculous negotiations are concluded, and their fleet is properly dispersed for the training exercises, we can eliminate their military capability in the opening hours and then proceed with occupation at our leisure. Hana felt a chill run down her spine as she listened to this casual discussion of genocide and conquest. But she maintained her calm expression and waited for Captain Park to ask for a translation of the exchange. Admiral Vextar has received positive reports from his advanced scouts about the success of our preliminary coordination efforts, she told the human delegation. He is optimistic that the joint training exercises will demonstrate the compatibility of our military doctrines. Park looked pleased. That's excellent news. The more our forces can work together, the stronger our partnership will become. If only he knew, Hana thought, that the Krathan scouts were mapping human defenses for invasion rather than cooperation. That evening, Hana sat in her quarters reviewing her notes from the day's sessions. Her small room was spartanly furnished, with just a bed, a desk, and a few personal items. To anyone who might search it, she appeared to be exactly what she claimed, a dedicated translator who took her job seriously. But hidden in her personal effects were devices that no interpreter would normally carry: a quantum-encrypted communicator disguised as a standard tablet, a molecular scanner that looked like a simple stylus, memory cores that appeared to be nothing more than decorative items. She was far more than just a translator, but her cover had held perfectly for months. She activated the communicator and began composing her daily report. Every conversation she had overheard, every detail about Krathan military capabilities, every piece of intelligence about their invasion plans was carefully encoded and transmitted to receivers that the aliens did not even know existed. The Krathan were so confident in their superiority that they never bothered to scan for human surveillance equipment. They assumed that humanity's technology was too primitive to pose any threat to their security. This assumption was proving to be a costly mistake. As she worked, Hana allowed herself to think about what would happen when the trap was finally sprung. The Krathan believed they were leading humanity into destruction, but they had no idea that their every move was being watched and recorded. Their invasion plans were being turned against them. Their fleet positions were being mapped and their weaknesses were being catalogued. Admiral Vextar thought he was dealing with weak, frightened humans who would collapse at the first sign of real opposition. He was about to learn that humanity had not survived and thrived in a hostile galaxy by being weak or frightened. They had survived by being smarter, more adaptable, and far more dangerous than their enemies ever expected. The joint training exercises would indeed demonstrate the compatibility of human and Krathan military doctrines. But the lesson would not be the one that Vextar was expecting to teach. The final day of negotiations arrived with an air of celebration among the Krathan delegation. Admiral Vextar entered the meeting room with what could only be described as a swagger, his massive form radiating confidence and barely contained excitement. He carried with him an ornate data tablet containing what he called the Friendship and Cooperation Treaty, a document that would supposedly establish the framework for peaceful relations between humanity and the Krathan Empire. Captain Park and his team looked nervous but hopeful as they took their seats. After months of difficult negotiations, they believed they were finally about to achieve the breakthrough that would secure humanity's place among the galactic community. Kim Nari kept checking her communications equipment, eager to send news of success back to Earth. Chief Engineer Deho sat quietly, his weathered hands folded on the table, but his eyes constantly moving between the Krathan delegates and their human counterparts. Hana took her usual position in the corner, her translator's badge gleaming under the artificial lights. To anyone watching, she appeared calm and professional, ready to facilitate the historic moment when two species would officially become allies. Only she knew that the document Admiral Vextar was about to present contained terms that would effectively make humanity slaves of the Krathan Empire. Today marks a new beginning for both our peoples, Vextar declared in his heavily accented human speech. The treaty we have prepared will ensure peace and prosperity for generations to come. What he told his subordinates in his native tongue was quite different. Today we complete the trap that will deliver an entire species into our hands, he said with obvious satisfaction. These fools have no idea what they are about to sign. Threk, standing at his commander's right side as always, allowed himself a rare display of amusement. The humans have made this almost too easy. They are so desperate for acceptance that they will agree to anything. Their desperation is our opportunity, Vextar replied. By the time they realize what they have signed, our fleets will already be in position to enforce the terms. Hana translated this exchange as a discussion of the mutual benefits that both species would gain from the treaty. Captain Park nodded approvingly, still believing that he was witnessing a historic moment of interspecies cooperation. The treaty itself was a masterpiece of deceptive language, written in Krathan legal terminology that had been specifically designed to confuse non-native speakers. It contained clauses that would grant the Krathan Empire sweeping powers over human territory and population. Section 12 established what were called cooperative administrative zones, areas where Krathan forces would have complete authority to maintain order. Section 18 outlined population optimization protocols that would allow for the forced relocation of human civilians to areas where they could be more easily controlled. The most insidious part was Section 25, which granted the Krathan the right to intervene militarily in cases where human security forces prove inadequate to maintain stability. This clause essentially gave them legal justification for invasion whenever they decided that human resistance had become inconvenient. As Hana read through the document, she had to admire the Krathan legal experts who had crafted it. Every horrible provision was disguised in language that sounded reasonable to someone who did not understand the full context. To human ears, it sounded like a partnership agreement. To Krathan ears, it was a surrender document. The terms seemed quite comprehensive, Captain Park said after Hana had provided her carefully edited translation. Though I must admit some of the technical language is beyond my understanding. That is why we have experts, Vextar replied smoothly. The important thing is that both sides are committed to making this partnership work. Behind his diplomatic smile, the alien admiral was practically vibrating with anticipation. He turned to Threk and spoke in rapid Krathan. Once they sign this document, we can begin immediate deployment of our occupation forces. The Grand Fleet is already moving into position around their major systems. How long until we can begin active operations? Threk asked. The moment their fleets disperse for the joint training exercises next week, Vextar replied. We will strike simultaneously at their shipyards, command centers, and communication networks. By the time they realize what is happening, it will be too late for any organized resistance. And if some of their military units refuse to surrender, then they will be destroyed as an example to the others, Vextar said with casual brutality. Fear is an excellent teacher. Hana translated this as a discussion of coordination protocols and communication procedures for the upcoming military exercises. She was running out of creative ways to turn plans for genocide into innocent diplomatic language. Ambassador Quen had been growing increasingly agitated as the day progressed. His soft, gray fur was standing on end, and his large, dark eyes darted constantly between the human and Krathan delegations. During a brief recess, he approached Captain Park with obvious urgency. Captain, I must speak with you privately, the Velnari said in his careful human speech. There are cultural nuances about this treaty that you should understand before making any final commitments. What kind of nuances? Park asked, looking concerned. Quen glanced nervously toward the Krathan delegation before continuing. In Krathan culture, certain legal terms have meanings that may not be immediately apparent to outsiders. What appears to be a partnership agreement might actually establish a very different relationship. Are you saying there are hidden meanings in the treaty? I am saying that wisdom suggests careful examination of all possibilities before making irreversible decisions, Quen replied cryptically. He could not speak more directly with Krathan ears nearby, but his message was clear to anyone willing to hear it. Kim Nari looked confused by the exchange. Are you suggesting that the Krathan are trying to deceive us, Ambassador? I am suggesting that misunderstandings can have serious consequences, Quen said carefully. Perhaps it would be wise to have your legal experts on Earth review the treaty before signing. Captain Park considered this suggestion. Admiral Vextar, would it be possible to delay the signing ceremony until we can have our legal department review the finer points of the agreement? The alien admiral's reaction was immediate and telling. His yellow eyes flashed with anger and his massive hands clenched into fists. For just a moment, the diplomatic mask slipped completely, and the humans got a glimpse of the predator underneath. Surely such delays are unnecessary, Vextar said, working to control his voice. We have spent months negotiating these terms. What more could your lawyers add to the process? It is just a formality, Park assured him. Standard procedure for any major agreement. We should have the review completed within a few days. Vextar's anger was barely contained as he spoke to Threk in rapid, harsh Krathen. These delays could ruin everything. If they discover what the treaty really says, all our planning will be wasted. Should we accelerate the timeline? Threk asked. We may have to, Vextar replied grimly. If they refuse to sign tomorrow, we will have to begin operations without the legal justification. It will be messier, but still achievable. What about the joint exercises? They will proceed as planned. Once their fleet is dispersed, we strike regardless of whether they have signed the treaty or not. Hana felt her heart racing as she listened to this exchange, but she maintained her calm exterior as she translated for the human delegation. Admiral Vextar expresses understanding of human bureaucratic requirements, she said. He agrees that proper legal review is important for such a significant agreement. That evening, as the delegations dispersed to their quarters, Hana finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had learned. The Krathen were prepared to launch their invasion with or without the legal cover of the treaty. The MAR, joint military exercises, were set to begin in just 4 days, and once the human fleet was scattered across the training areas, they would be sitting targets. In the privacy of her quarters, she activated her quantum communicator and began composing the most important message of her career. Every detail of the Krathen invasion plan, every fleet position, every tactical weakness she had observed over the months of careful listening. The information flowed through encrypted channels to receivers that would distribute it to the highest levels of human command. But there was more to transmit than just intelligence. Hidden in her personal effects were detailed technical specifications of Krathen weapons and defenses, gathered through careful observation and covert scanning. She had memorized guard rotations, supply schedules, and communication protocols. Most importantly, she had identified the key commanders and the chain of authority that held the Krathen forces together. As she worked through the night, Hana allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Admiral Vextar believed he was dealing with primitive, trusting humans who could be easily manipulated and conquered. He had no idea that every word he had spoken, every plan he had revealed, every weakness he had displayed was being turned into a weapon that would soon be pointed directly at his empire's heart. The trap was indeed set, but not the one the Krathen expected. Tomorrow would bring the final act of this deadly game of deception. Admiral Vextar arrived at the meeting chamber early, his massive form bristling with barely contained aggression. The delay in signing the treaty had clearly frustrated him, and overnight he had made the decision to abandon all pretense of diplomacy. Today would see the end of negotiations one way or another. Behind him marched a full escort of Krathen security troops, their weapons clearly visible and their intentions unmistakable. The meeting chamber had been subtly transformed during the night. What had once been a space designed for peaceful diplomatic discourse now felt more like a trap waiting to snap shut. The Krathen guards positioned themselves at every exit while additional troops waited in the corridors outside. To anyone watching, it was obvious that the aliens no longer intended to let the human delegation leave peacefully. Captain Park entered the room with his usual tired expression, seemingly oblivious to the changed atmosphere. Kim Nari followed, close behind, her youthful face showing concern at the visible military presence but not yet understanding what it meant. Chief Engineer Daiho moved more cautiously, his experienced eyes taking note of guard positions and potential threats with the skill of someone who had survived many dangerous situations. Hana took her usual position in the corner, but today something was different about her. The change was subtle. A slight straightening of her shoulders, a new alertness in her eyes, a subtle shift in how she held herself. For months she had played the role of the quiet, unassuming translator, but that performance was finally coming to an end. Only Captain Park seemed to notice the transformation, and he watched her with growing interest. "I trust your legal experts have completed their review of our treaty," Vextar said as the session began. His voice carried an undercurrent of threat that had not been there in previous meetings. "We are eager to conclude these negotiations and move forward with our partnership." What he told his subordinates in Krathen was far more direct. "The humans have had their last chance to cooperate voluntarily. If they refuse to sign today, we will take them prisoner and proceed with the invasion immediately." Threk nodded his understanding. "The fleet commanders are standing by for the attack order. All human positions have been scouted and targeted." "Excellent," Vextar replied with savage satisfaction. "Either way, this ends today." Captain Park looked uncomfortable as he prepared to respond. "Admiral, I appreciate your eagerness, but I'm afraid we need a few more days to fully understand some of the technical clauses in the agreement." The alien admiral's reaction was immediate and explosive. His yellow eyes flashed with fury, and his massive hands slammed down on the table with enough force to crack the reinforced surface. "Enough delays," he roared. "You will sign this treaty now or face the consequences of your obstinance." For the first time in months, Vextar had spoken in the human language when he was angry, and his true intentions were finally visible to everyone in the room. The human delegates stared at him in shock, suddenly realizing that they were not among friends. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," Park said carefully, his hand moving slowly toward his communications device. "There has been no misunderstanding," Vexitar snarled. "You are weak, primitive creatures who should be grateful for the opportunity to serve a superior species. Your pathetic civilization will make excellent slaves once we have crushed what little resistance you can offer." Kim Nari gasped at this revelation, her face going pale with shock and fear. "Captain, what is he saying?" "He's saying that these negotiations were never real," Park replied grimly. "They were just a way to keep us busy while they planned to attack us." Vextar laughed, a horrible sound like grinding stone. Finally, some intelligence from the humans. "Yes, every word you have spoken, every plan you have revealed, every weakness you have shown has been catalogued and prepared for use against you. Your fleet positions, your defensive strategies, your pathetic military capabilities. We know everything." The alien admiral turned to address his guards in Krathen, his voice filled with triumphant malice. "Secure the humans. Once they are our prisoners, we can use them to help convince their people to surrender without unnecessary bloodshed. Begin the invasion immediately." As the Krathen guards moved to surround the human delegation, Hana finally stood up from her corner seat. The movement was fluid and controlled, like a predator emerging from concealment. When she spoke, her voice was no longer the soft, professional tone of a diplomatic translator. It was the crisp, commanding voice of a military officer who had been waiting months for this moment. "Admiral Vextar," she said, speaking in perfect, unaccented Krathen that stopped every alien in the room cold, "I believe there has been a misunderstanding." The chamber fell completely silent. Vextar stared at her with growing horror as the implications of what he had just heard sank in. For months, this quiet human female had been sitting in the corner of every meeting, listening to every private conversation, recording every secret plan. She had understood every word they had said. "You," he whispered, his voice shaking with rage and fear. "You understood everything." "Every word," Hana confirmed, her Krathen pronunciation flawless. "Every plan, every strategy, every detail of your intended invasion. Did you really think that humanity would send untrained diplomats to negotiate with a species that had conquered half the galaxy?" Captain Park was staring at her with amazement. "Hana, who are you?" She turned to face him, and for the first time, he could see the steel behind her eyes. "Lieutenant Colonel Lee Hana, Military Intelligence Corps," she said. "My apologies for the deception, Captain, but it was necessary for the mission." Vextar's mind was racing as he tried to understand the full scope of what had happened. "If you knew our plans, Why did you not warn your people? Why did you sit there and let us prepare for invasion? Hana smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Because we needed you to commit your forces. We needed you to move your fleets into position. We needed you to reveal every detail of your military capabilities. You have been very thorough in your planning, Admiral, and very helpful in your explanations. The joint training exercises, Threk said with dawning horror. You know about the trap. We know about everything, Hana confirmed. Your fleet positions, your attack schedules, your supply lines, your command structure. Every weakness in your forces has been mapped and catalogued. Every ship you have deployed is already targeted. Vextar pulled out his communication device with frantic urgency. All units abort the training exercise. Return to defensive positions immediately. I'm afraid it's too late for that, Hana said calmly. She reached into her jacket and pulled out her own communications device. Not the simple translator equipment she had carried for months, but a military-grade command unit. Control, this is Colonel Lee, authentication code 77 Alpha. The response came immediately through the device's speakers, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. Authentication confirmed, Colonel. All units are in position and awaiting your order. Vextar's eyes widened with understanding and terror. Impossible. Your fleet was scattered for the exercises. We monitored your ship movements. You monitored the movements we wanted you to see, Hana corrected. Did you really think we would send our entire fleet into a trap without proper preparation? Every ship you tracked was exactly where we wanted it to be, and every ship you didn't track was exactly where you didn't expect it. She looked directly into Vexitar's yellow eyes as she spoke into her communicator. Control, execute Operation Thunderstrike. All units are weapons-free. Confirmed, Colonel. Thunderstrike is go. All units engaging. Through the viewing ports of the space station, the first flashes of weapons fire began to appear as human warships emerged from concealment to engage the scattered Krathan fleet. The aliens had been so confident in their trap that they had never considered the possibility that it might be turned against them. Vextar watched in horror as his carefully planned invasion turned into a slaughter. His ships were caught completely off guard, dispersed across the training area with no coordination and no defensive formation. The human fleet struck with precision and overwhelming force, targeting command ships first to break the Krathan chain of command. How? He whispered, unable to comprehend how his superior forces could be defeated so easily. You made the classic mistake of underestimating your enemy, Hana explained with calm professionalism. You assumed that because we seemed weak and primitive, we actually were weak and primitive. You never considered that our apparent weakness might be a carefully constructed facade. Captain Park was watching the battle through the viewing ports with a mixture of awe and satisfaction. The training exercises were never real, were they? The exercises were very real, Hana replied. But they were not the training you thought they were. We have been preparing for this moment for months, using every piece of intelligence gathered during these negotiations to plan the perfect counterattack. As the last of the Krathan ships were destroyed or disabled, Hana spoke into her communicator, once more. Control, this is Colonel Lee. Primary objectives achieved. Krathan invasion force has been neutralized. The voice that responded was filled with satisfaction. Outstanding work, Colonel. Phase 2 is now authorized. Begin securing all Krathan territories and assets. The silence in the meeting chamber was broken only by the distant sounds of explosions, as the last Krathan ships were systematically destroyed by the human fleet. Admiral Vextar stood frozen at the viewing port, watching his invasion force being torn apart by enemies he had dismissed as primitive and weak. His massive hands trembled as the full scope of his defeat became clear. Through the transparent aluminum windows, the space around Concordia Station was filled with the debris of what had once been the most powerful fleet in Krathan history. Human warships moved through the wreckage with deadly precision, their weapon systems tracking down every escape pod and communication relay to ensure that no word of the disaster could reach the Krathan homeworld. Impossible, Vextar whispered, his voice barely audible. Our ships were superior, our weapons were more advanced, our tactics were proven in a dozen conquest campaigns. Hana watched the alien admirals break down with professional detachment. Superior technology means nothing if your enemy knows exactly where and when you plan to use it, she said calmly. Every tactical doctrine you employed, every weapon system you deployed, every strategic decision you made was observed and analyzed during these negotiations. Captain Park was beginning to understand the full scope of what had been happening around him for months. The delays, the questions, the requests for technical details, you were gathering intelligence the entire time. Every conversation was recorded, Hana confirmed. Every technical specification was catalogued. Every weakness in their forces was identified and exploited. The Krathen were so confident in their superiority that they never bothered to consider the possibility that we might be learning from them. Kim Nari was staring at Hana with a mixture of awe and confusion. But you're just a translator. How could you know about military operations and space combat? I am Lieutenant Colonel Lee Hana of the Human Intelligence Corps, she replied. My translator credentials were cover for this operation. Every member of this delegation has been playing a role designed to gather information and prepare for this moment. She gestured toward Chief Engineer Deho, who was calmly working at a control panel near the wall. Engineer Deho is actually Colonel Choi of the Special Operations Division. While you thought he was discussing technical specifications with the Krathen engineers, he was actually mapping their ship designs and identifying critical vulnerabilities. Deho looked up from his work with a slight smile. The Krathen were very helpful in explaining how their life support systems work. That information proved quite useful when we modified the atmosphere processing on this station. As if summoned by his words, several Krathen guards began to collapse, their breathing becoming labored and erratic. The air that had been perfectly safe for them just hours before was now slowly becoming toxic to their physiology. Vexitar noticed his soldiers falling and spun around in panic. What have you done? Atmospheric modification, Deho explained, matter-of-factly. Over the past 3 days, I have been introducing trace compounds into the station's air supply that are harmless to human and Velnari physiology, but gradually toxic to Krathen biology. You have been breathing poison for 72 hours. Threk stumbled and fell to one knee, gasping for air that was no longer able to sustain his massive frame. The negotiations, he wheezed. You have been planning this from the beginning. From the moment we received your first diplomatic message, Hana confirmed. Humanity does not negotiate from a position of weakness, Admiral. We negotiate from a position of carefully prepared strength. Captain Park was beginning to see his role in the operation from a new perspective. My confusion, my apparent inexperience with diplomatic protocol, that was all part of the act. You played your part perfectly, Captain, Hana assured him. The Krathen needed to believe that they were dealing with inexperienced, frightened humans who could be easily manipulated. Your apparent weakness made them overconfident and careless. Through her communicator, reports were coming in from across the galaxy as Phase 2 of the operation began. Human forces, supported by rebels from dozens of species that had been conquered by the Krathen Empire, were simultaneously striking at Krathen installations throughout their territory. Colonel Lee, this is Admiral Santos aboard the UES Retribution, came a voice through the device. We have secured the Krathen shipyards at Nexus 7. Resistance was minimal. The enemy forces were completely unprepared for coordinated assault. Confirmed, Admiral, Hana replied. What is the status of the civilian populations? The Velnari and Hegemony prisoners have been liberated and are requesting immediate asylum with human forces. They are providing detailed intelligence on remaining Krathen installations. Ambassador Quen, who had been watching the proceedings, with growing amazement stepped forward with tears streaming down his furry cheeks. My people have been slaves for 40 years, he said in his careful human speech. I never dared to hope that freedom was possible. Freedom is always possible, Hana replied. It just requires someone willing to fight for it. Another voice came through the communicator. Colonel, this is General Rodriguez at Tau Ceti Command. We have received surrender requests from Krathen governors on 17 worlds. They are offering complete capitulation in exchange for safe passage. Surrender terms are to be negotiated individually, Hana instructed. Priority goes to the immediate safety of liberated populations. Krathen military personnel who cooperate with the transition will be treated according to the standards of civilized warfare. Vextar, now struggling to remain standing as the poisoned atmosphere continued to affect his system, looked at her with something approaching respect. You speak of civilized warfare while poisoning your enemies. I speak of warfare that achieves its objectives with minimum casualties on both sides, Hana corrected. Your soldiers will recover completely once they are removed from this environment. Compare that to your plans for human breeding programs and population management. Nari was still trying to process everything she had learned. But why me? Why was I included in this operation if everyone else was intelligence personnel? Because we needed someone genuine, Captain Park explained, finally dropping his own cover of inexperience. Your reactions, your questions, your obvious sincerity, all of that helped convince the Krathen that they were dealing with naive humans who could be easily deceived. Also, Hana added with the first genuine smile she had shown in months, you are an exceptional communications officer, and we needed someone who could handle the coordination of a galaxy-wide liberation operation. As if on cue, Nari's communication equipment began receiving dozens of incoming messages from across Krathen space. Reports of successful operations, requests for assistance, offers of alliance from newly liberated species, and desperate pleas for help from populations still under Krathen control. This is overwhelming, Nari said as she tried to process the flood of information. Welcome to Phase 3, Hana said. Now that we have broken the Krathen Empire's military power, we need to help rebuild the galaxy as a community of free species, rather than a collection of conquered territories. Vextar, now barely able to stand, made one final attempt to understand his defeat. How long have you been planning this operation? Since the day we received your first message requesting negotiations, Hana replied. Humanity learned long ago that the galaxy is full of species that view cooperation as weakness and diplomacy as an opportunity for deception. We learned to prepare for that reality. But you seemed so eager for friendship, so desperate for acceptance. We were eager for friendship with those who deserved it, Captain Park corrected. But we were also prepared for those who did not. The choice was always yours, Admiral. You chose conquest over cooperation. Through the viewing ports, human ships were already beginning rescue operations, pulling Krathen survivors from disabled vessels and providing medical assistance. The same species that Vextar had planned to enslave was now saving the lives of his soldiers. I do not understand, the alien admiral gasped. Why save us after what we planned to do to you? Because we are not you, Hana said simply. We do not conquer for the sake of power, or enslave for the sake of convenience. We fight when we must, but we do not become monsters in the process. The final report came through her communicator as the last Krathen stronghold surrendered. Colonel Lee, this is Fleet Admiral Chen. All primary objectives have been achieved. The Krathen Empire has been effectively dismantled as a military threat. Casualty reports show minimal losses on our side, and surprisingly light casualties among Krathen forces. Confirmed, Admiral, Hana replied. Begin Phase 4, humanitarian assistance and political reconstruction. As medical teams arrived to treat the poisoned Krathen in the meeting chamber, Ambassador Quen approached Hana with deep gratitude in his large dark eyes. On behalf of all the species that suffered under Krathen rule, I thank you. But I must ask, what happens now? Now we build something better, she replied. A galactic community based on mutual respect and voluntary cooperation rather than conquest and domination. It will not be easy, but it will be worth the effort. Vextar, being helped to a medical station by human personnel, looked back at her one final time.